좋아요, 구독!
네, 이렇게 암호화폐 시황까지 체크를 하고 버니의 미국 주식 시간으로 돌아왔습니다. 미국 시카고 현지에 계신 버니 씨의 의견을 들어서 이 뉴욕 증시 그리고 글로벌 증시에 대해서 자세하게 좀 이야기를 들어보는 시간인데요. 오늘 같은 경우는 이번 시간에는 지수보다 낮은 성과를 보인 섹터를 통해서 우리가 얻을 수 있는 기회에 대한 이야기를 해주신다고 합니다. 최근 국내 증시뿐만 아니라 글로벌 증시도 반등세를 좀 이어오고 있는 와중에 간밤에 뉴욕 증시는 혼조세를 보였다는 말씀 좀 전해드렸는데요. 이런 움직임이 보이고 있는 시장 속에서 기회를 찾는 법 이야기 들어보도록 하겠습니다. 함께 보시죠.
So one thing we want to take a look at now, we can look at a lot of different things. If we think the market's basically tried to base around here and hopefully stays here and starts to work its way a little higher as the year goes along, let's look at a sector that has completely underperformed the market over the last 2 years and then identify a stock within that sector that I think is really interesting. That stock is CRISPR Technologies. CRISPR is a really interesting biotechnology company that is headquartered in Switzerland, and what it has, amongst other things, it's got a drug that assists in the benefit and help of treating sickle cell anemia. The company has been, it has an investor, Bayer, which is a big German chemical company, and Bayer is a very smart company. It's investing in this company for very good reasons. One of the founders of the company shared the Nobel Prize in Chemistry a couple of years ago, and what we want to think about here is that there are other drugs that are in the pipeline for CRISPR. The problem with biotech is it's very difficult for us to be able to identify that that company is good or not because we don't know about the trials until they get released. So it's all of a sudden a surprise. But what we want to think about is, can we buy a stock that's cheap to that sector, and that sector, which is usually a great sector, is cheap to the market as a whole? And so when we look at the biotech index relative to the S&P 500, we are now just coming off levels that are as cheap as we've been since 2007. That's a fairly significant thing. And we can see how significant the underperformance was between early 2021 and now. So now we're able to identify stocks that are cheap to the index, and that index is cheap overall to the market as a whole. When we look at Micron as a whole, we can identify right here these horizontal bars. The pink horizontal bars are sell volume, and the green horizontal part of the bar is buy volume. This goes over the last 2 years. So we can really see that there's a critical reference point of about $75 to $80, where if that stock has stayed below all year long. We also can see that the bottom of that stock market at 43 bucks basically was the low of the biotech index relative to the S&P 500. So what we now have is, what we'd like to try and do is to be able to identify places here that we can generate risk-reward decisions on this. So when we look at this chart right here, and I've extended it to 3 years, we can now see where the sell volume basically peaked, okay, and that's right around $48, $50, which is about where we got to in May. And we can also now see that if we can stay above, say, $60 on the stock, I think that's a real positive. And we still need to get above that critical $75 to $80 area. Once we can get above there, I think that stock can really start to go. And we can target about $128 to $130 as my first target to get to that stock. We can also look here and see the volume now has been some of the best buy volume all year long. So I think that's a real positive experience for the stock. When we look at just CRISPR now and we go back and we look at the last, say, year of the stock, what we can see is the bottom in May, and we basically went down to a low in momentum, and we've had positive momentum. Not only positive momentum, but we've also had momentum above zero. So what we've done is been able to hold that positive momentum. If we can stay above zero with this big volume, I think that's a real positive for the stock. Now what we want to show here is over the course of the last year, you can see on the top clip, this is the biotech index, and you can see how that biotech index made a new low, but yet the second clip is CRISPR relative to the biotech index has had positive momentum against that index. It's outperformed that index. The third clip, it's outperformed the S&P 500 as a whole also since May. And May, if we notice, was the weakest part of that whole period. And also now what we can see is that sector, the biotech sector, since early June is outperforming the S&P 500 right now. So we're identifying a good place to be able to look for and experience positive stock performance in a sector that has basically underperformed significantly over the last 2 years. Now we can see from a seasonality standpoint, the months that we've outperformed the S&P 500, that CRISPR has outperformed. And we can see we're in this window right here of positive outperformance over the S&P 500 on a monthly basis when we look at seasonality. When we break this down and we look at the periods of time and look at the detail on it, what we can see is we have positive experiences in the second half, particularly the fourth quarter of the year when the stock does well. So only 1 year the stock has gone down substantially, but generally speaking, I believe that we should experience a positive performance, and that focus of the positive performance might be best in the fourth quarter of this year. And I also think the fourth quarter of this year could be a good time to be basically experiencing positive stock performance.
좋아요, 구독!